Hello. Today's reading is taken from John chapter 19, verses 25 to 30. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. I wonder whether we would dare to stand near the cross. Jesus had predicted that when it came to the crunch, his disciples would all run away and abandon him. And that is largely what happened. Peter, who had loudly declared that even if everyone else falls away, he would not. He's nowhere to be seen. And where are the rest of the 12 who followed Jesus all the way from Galilee? Well, they're hiding. Why is this? Maybe they can't bear it, can't bear the agony of looking on this scene of the one they loved being brutally executed, the blood from the crown of thorns running down his face, nails through his hands and feet. They prefer to hide their faces. Maybe they're ashamed that they've not defended him or stopped this from happening. Judas has betrayed him. Peter has denied him. Maybe they feel complicit in what is happening and they can't cope with the guilt, can't look Jesus in the eye. They prefer to hide their faces. Most likely, they're afraid that they too will be arrested, tortured, executed, die a criminal's death in the same way. They're terrified both of the religious leaders in the temple and of the merciless power of the Romans. They prefer to hide their faces. But despite all this, 5 remain, 4 women, 1 man. Mary Magdalene is there. She'll be one of the first to see the resurrected Jesus a couple of days later on Easter morning. Mary, the wife of Clopas, who may well be one of those who met with the risen Jesus on the road to Emmaus. Jesus' aunt, the disciple whom Jesus loved, who many think might actually be John himself, the author of this gospel. And Mary, Jesus' mother. In this kind of society, women are less of a threat than men. They're less likely to get arrested, more often allowed to come and go. They blend into the background. John may well have been a very young man, in his late teens perhaps, so may also have been at less risk from the authorities. But nevertheless, it must have taken great courage and great, great love to stand near the cross on that day, to look on this scene of agony and suffering. They don't hide their faces. They stand and they look, and they are with him to the very end. It's not easy being a mum, or a stepmum, or a foster carer, or any person who dearly loves a child. And many people listening to this will have been through agonies as you see children that you love going through terrible pain, experiencing great suffering, making choices that you really wish they'd not made. Perhaps you'll have identified Mary when she's a proud new mum. Do you remember that scene when she goes to the temple holding the beautiful new baby Jesus in her arms? Because all babies are beautiful, aren't they? Even if they do look like wrinkly aliens. But then this man, this old man, Simeon, a righteous prophet, comes to her and says to her, "A sword will pierce your soul." And that is true, isn't it? That's what it means to really love someone, whether it be your child or a friend or anybody that you really care about. Love hurts. Love is costly. A sword will pierce your own soul too. We've felt that pain. Love often leads to agony. Love often leads to grief. Mary was there right at the beginning. She was there at Jesus' conception, Jesus' birth. She'd raised him. He was there with her in Nazareth through all those long years of quiet when we don't hear a word about him. She watched him as he suddenly bursts into the limelight, suddenly begins his public ministry and teaches and heals and does miracles. Even right at the beginning of his ministry, do you remember that wedding at Cana when the wine is running out? It's she who knows that he can do something about it. She knows him. Whatever he says to you, do it, she tells the servants. And suddenly there's more and better wine than anyone had ever asked for, an abundance. And yet here, at the cross, the one who quenched people's thirst is himself thirsty. And Mary has to watch as he is given the worst kind of sour wine to wet his dry and cracked lips. She was there at his birth, and she's there at his death. It's not easy being a mum. It's not easy being anyone who truly loves another. But this is what Jesus wants for us. He wants us to love. He wants us to love with such courage and devotion that we're prepared to stand near the cross. He doesn't want us to hide from one another or separate ourselves off from one another or from him, of course. He wants us to be there, even in the hardest times, even in the middle of such agony that we can hardly bear to look, because that's what he has done for us. He has loved us so much that he has laid down his life for his friends, for us. Back in John's Gospel, chapter 13, just as John is about to describe Jesus' last meal with his disciples and recount the epic farewell speech that he makes to them, John writes this: "It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. There are not many who are more his own than his own mother and the beloved disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. And so we have this scene at the foot of the cross where Jesus looks down and he sees his mother and he sees his one friend who is left standing there, the one who he was so fond of. And Jesus in that situation does something amazing and beautiful, even when he's dying. He says to Mary, "Woman, here is your son." We have to remember that this word woman was not disrespectful. It perhaps could even have been loving and tender. Jesus asks Mary to be a mother to this young lad. He's not a blood relative to her, but I'm sure he is feeling lost and lonely and frightened and confused at this moment as he sees his teacher, his mentor, dying on the cross. He needs someone to be a mum to him at that moment. And then he says to the beloved disciple, "Here is your mother. Here is your mother," because she needs someone too. Mary was probably a widow by this time, as Joseph was likely quite a bit older than her, and widows in that society were vulnerable and often very poor. And Jesus knows that she needs someone to protect her, to care for her. And John records this beautiful thing, that from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. John's Gospel has a lot in it about coming home, about dwelling, about abiding, about remaining, being at home in God. The Word became flesh. We read that every Christmas, don't we? The Word became flesh and made his dwelling, made his home among us. In my Father's house there are many rooms. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And the word here in Greek that John uses for took her into his home, received her into his home, is the same root as the word Jesus used when he said these words, again back in chapter 13. Whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. By taking Mary in, by receiving her, by accepting her into his home, the beloved disciple, implies John, also receives Christ, accepts Christ, and in doing so receives and accepts the Father. When we love one another enough to receive each other into our lives, to accept one another with a costly, Christ-like, sacrificial love, then we also receive and accept Jesus. And in doing so, we also receive and accept the Father. When the church does this for one another, Jesus comes and dwells within us and makes his home in us. Traditionally, Mothering Sunday was not actually about celebrating mums. It was about celebrating Mother Church. It was a festival where people would go back to the church, the Christian community, where they'd first been baptised, where they'd first learned about Christ. And I believe that in this little snapshot at the foot of the cross in John's Gospel, we have a really powerful picture of church, of what the church can and should be. Mary and the disciple whom Jesus loved, very different from one another, different ages, different sexes, different backgrounds, not blood relatives, but nevertheless family, united in their love and devotion to Jesus Christ, brought together at the foot of the cross by the word of Christ. And as they receive and accept one another, they are also receiving and accepting him. And this is what happens when we really are church, when we really and truly love one another. Again, back in chapter 13, Jesus said to his disciples, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." When we really are church to one another, it's about costly, sacrificial love that stands by one another in the midst of agony and suffering. It's about radical hospitality that's prepared not just to smile across the room on a Sunday, although that's a good start, but to receive one another into our homes, to care for one another in our grief, to be family to one another, even though we are not blood family. So whether we are physical mothers or not, we are all mothers and fathers here in church. The children and younger people that are among us in our churches are there for us to love and care for and pray for and mentor and encourage and form into disciples. Whether our parents are still alive or whether they're dead or whether they're just really rubbish parents, we still have spiritual fathers and mothers and grandparents in church. And they are there for us to honour and learn from and sit at the feet of as they tell us their stories. And we are all to be there for one another when illness comes, when grief comes, when poverty or unemployment comes or loneliness comes. And to rejoice too. We rejoice with one another too. And when we truly are church together, when we truly love one another with this costly sacrificial love that flows down from Jesus on the cross and flows into our hearts and into our lives and into our homes, then that is when the Spirit of God comes to dwell within us. That is when we truly make a house for God to live in, a house filled with joy and love and peace, a house where everyone has a place, where no one is ignored or insignificant. Psalm 68 talks about the character of God. His name is the Lord, a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. He sets the lonely in families. He sets the lonely in families. So church, that is my prayer for us, that we can be a place where no one is fatherless, where widows are sheltered, where the lonely are received into families with love and honour and blessing, where there is hospitality and generosity and prayer, where people from the community outside the church look at us and say, oh, those folk from the church, they really do love one another, don't they? And that's how they know that we are his disciples. And we're not there yet, but that's what my hope and prayer is for us as church. And we need to think, what might it take for us to get there? Maybe I'm being idealistic. And yes, it's going to be messy. Human beings are messy. We're all messy. But as we stand at the foot of the cross, we who have seen Jesus, we who have been saved by his grace, welcomed into his family, we who have known how great is the love he has lavished on us, that he has called us children of God, as we stand at the foot of the cross, maybe he might open our eyes to those who are standing nearby. Maybe he'll say to us, look, a mother, look, a son, look, a teenager to pray for and encourage. Look, an elderly person to care for and visit. Look, someone who needs a friend. God sets the lonely in families. So let's be a family. Let's be the church. Amen.